Oh boy, am I hungry. I want fries, a hamburger. No, make that 2 fries. You want anything? What's your special today?
Episode 6. Welcome to the Northwest Builders Lunch Hour, hosted by Truss Components. I am Chad Johnson. Today, my guests are William Blankenship, our operations manager here at Truss Components, and Stan Dickhoff, our sales manager here at Truss Components. We are eating lunch from the Brick, and welcome. Enjoy. So our topic today is going to be how to have a smooth experience working with a truss company, all the way from the initial quote through the truss delivery and any work necessary after that. So we like to start out with just a little bit of background. And so, William, I'd like you to tell us, start when you were born, or maybe somewhere after that, and just let us know a bit about how you ended up in the construction industry and eventually at Truss Components.
All right, so let me see where to begin. I think my tiptoe into construction was helping some people when I was younger, probably a teenager, doing some framing. I kind of got the little bug for working with framing and any type of lumber stuff. I kind of fell right into it at 18 after working some odd jobs before that, working with landscape cleanup, what other stuff, finished carpentry, some basic framing, and then got into production at a cut stock mill. So wood all the time, love the smell of sawdust, so it was,
you bet.
In the morning especially. I did that for probably 4 years, 5 years, a couple of different mills I worked at. Then got out of the, got into some other some other production work, working with people with disabilities. Did that for a few years, and then was needed a change and a job. And somebody I knew was working at Truss Components of Central Oregon, and they were hiring. And so I said, here I am. What do I do? What's a truss? Oh,
Yep.
That's right. I remember a truss. I remember rolling a truss on a plate line and freaking out because I didn't want to walk the 2x6 plate line. But, so I knew a little bit about them, and it was lumber.
Yep.
There was sawdust everywhere, and so here we go. I started working with trusses.
Yeah, all right. So you started working at Truss Components in what capacity?
I actually started out at the saw, tailing the saw.
All right. And what was the progression? You're operations manager now, so how did the progression take place?
Let's see, from tailing the saw to about a month later starting to run the met saw, learning to run the component saw, to going inside and helping build, and all of a sudden be told I was going to become a jig lead, which after a couple weeks. And then when there was an opening for a shift supervisor, I was approached and asked if I would be interested in the position, and this was about 3 months into my employment.
Oh, wow.
I had already had some experience leading and supervising in previous roles at other jobs, so it was pretty easy for me to come into some of those other roles. It was kind of a cakewalk, so I said yes.
Yep.
And then about 6 months after doing that, they approached me again, said, "Do you want to learn how to drive truck and run the crane?" And I said yes, and did that for a couple of years. And then I think it was 2008, we were looking for a new production manager, and myself and the general manager at the time kind of came together on a Monday morning. Hey, I got this great idea. He's like, me too. And so I became the production manager. 2008, towards the end, we kind of shut down, as everyone knows, because the industry kind of tanked because of the recession. And I stayed on part-time delivering trusses. Didn't really have to build anything because we didn't really have a full-on shop. We just had everything from our main office down in Oregon. So did that for a few years, and then went to school, tried to get out of the industry, but getting sucked back in.
Yep.
And I think it was about 2010 13, there were some things that happened, and opportunity to become a designer, salesperson, and driver all at the same time, So that's what I did for a few years until some guy named Chad Johnson called me up and said, "You want to come interview for my production manager job?" And so I took the opportunity, and I came up here, and it was like 7 years ago. Started out as a production manager, and as we've grown, the need for my position arose, and other people underneath me into other roles. So then, operations manager, and that's where I am now.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Stan, I'm going to throw the same question out to you.
Well, I was born in Olympia, which makes me sound stable, but that's not the case. Went to high school out on the coast and graduated from Hope William High School in 1969. Felt like the draft was inevitable, so I beat them to the punch and joined the Army and served in Germany and Vietnam. I never did smell napalm in the morning.
Well, thank you for your service nonetheless.
Thank you. And then out of college, or out of the Army, I'm sorry, went into working in lumber mills, learned a little bit about lumber grading and how lumber's produced, and decided that college was a better choice. Went to college, looked for a part-time job, got hired in the truss business, worked part-time from the broom on up, and did some technical work because I understood Pythagoras' theorem and was able to do some of the cutting. And then when I was way too young and inexperienced, I was offered a job as plant manager of a new truss plant in Auburn, Washington. And being about 6 miles over my head, took some courses in drafting and business and accounting and labor law, all of which stood me in good stead. And then took a little leave of absence in 78, 79, went to Hawaii to do some church work, but was hired back by my employer to represent the company in Hawaii. Moved back and worked for several companies, too long to mention all of them, but various management roles. I think one of the more interesting jobs was a district sales manager for a truss plate company called Gangnail Systems, which is now MyTech, which is the engineering and steel connector plates that we use here. They also provide equipment. Traveled up to 19 different states, and then decided it would be nice to be home every night, and got back into the truss business locally. Actually started at Truss Components the first time under founder Charlie Buchelman, and did some production management, left for a while and worked for a big corporation. Charlie and I talked, and I came back in about 2003 or 4 when he went to Central Oregon. I then became general manager here in Tumwater and left in 2006 to take a position at a state-of-the-art plant in Longview. 2008 treated me pretty much the way it treated William, maybe a little more severely, so I got out of the truss business, worked in a couple nonprofits, and then
You could have stayed in the truss business to do that during that period of time.
that's true. Yeah. And I think because it was nonprofit, I lost the opportunity. So the huge investment in Longview became vacant. And then entered back in 2019, a little downturn at the end of last year, and found myself looking for another opportunity. was not at all convinced that Chad would want me back here, but I don't know if it was retribution or or confidence in my abilities. So I came back as sales manager in February of this year.
Yep, and we're glad to have you.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So I really appreciate hearing the histories. I always learn something. I mean, even though I know the two of you, there's always some little bit that comes out that I didn't know about, and so that's a lot of fun. Such similar stories. They're the stories that you guys tell of, starting out as a sales sawyer and working your way up through the company. It's just pretty typical for this industry, I think. And I like to mention that because the construction industry as a whole is an industry where there's a lot of opportunity for people that want to do something with their hands, have an opportunity maybe right out of high school to get into a career that they can grow in. And the construction industry as a whole, I think, kind of meets that need for some people. And the truss industry definitely, historically for sure, has been that way. So thanks for sharing those stories.
I've heard it said that nobody says when they're a young person, I really want to work in the truss business. But I think there's some exceptions to that rule now that we've matured a bit as an industry. But still.
We probably need to have a book in the elementary schools that so people know what trusses are from early on.
Yeah. Right.
Yep. So what we want to talk about today is how can a builder have a smooth, friction-free experience, with a truss company as they're starting out probably at either the quote or permit process, and then working their way through everything that's involved in ending up with roof trusses on site and a roof on someone's new house or church or school or whatever the project happens to be. So I'm gonna ask you, Stan, to tell us a little bit about how that interaction begins with a salesperson and what kind of services do we provide, what kind of information might we need in order to get started.
Well, I think it starts before the plans are drawn. I think it's very important that, and I know we have established relationships with architects and builders, but clear information on the plans is helpful right on down to the time we deliver. So any unanswered questions should be addressed with the specifier, architect, engineer. And oftentimes our contractor is a liaison there. So first of all, I've always said we read plans not only to find out what it tells us, but to determine what it doesn't tell us. Because there's generally something that's very pertinent to our operation left off of the detail. So that to me is the first step. The next step is really simple, but often overlooked details like where is that job site? And
that could be important.
Yeah, and somebody says, well, it's in Lacey, right by the 7-Eleven there. And but give me an address, and then let us determine the accessibility of the job.
Yeah.
I know when William wants to send a truck out, it's kind of nice to be able to get into the job site, be aware of any obstacles, power lines, sewers underneath the ground that we shouldn't drive over, all kinds of little details like that. So that's where we would start, and then a clear conversation with the contractor about the features that are available. Sometimes things aren't drawn, but hey, there was an assumption made as to our limitations of our product that don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
The ridge on a vaulted truss does not need to line up with the ridge on the roof. But that has been kind of understood. So that you and I have talked, Chad, about the importance of the new energy code and how that's going to affect, even though it may be an older set of plans, there may be new criteria that we need to be aware of that has to do with where the mechanical units are located. And so that's a beginning.
Yeah, excellent. So the customer has gotten together with the architect. They've drawn plans. They hopefully have the information that we need. When we receive those plans, what is our process here to get started on getting the client a quote? And what sort of things can we do for the client once we have the set of plans?
Well, first again, we can talk to them about features that aren't included, but beyond that, it goes to our design department that does preliminary designs. Those aren't always detailed designs, but they're enough information to get that through the process to get a meaningful information to determine what the price is. We've gone so far as on large projects to just design part of the building, if it's a very large project, and say, well, this is how much it is for this area, and then multiply it out. So that expedites the bid process. Everybody wants a number in a hurry. The more we know, the better off we are in terms of dialing down what our actual costs are. So after the bid is complete, they look at our price and decide that they would like to go with us. Then it goes into a final design process where we get down to the nitty-gritty on every little detail, and at times, not always needed, but at times go do a site measure. And here's a point I would really love to emphasize. Our site measure, in fact, I'm trying to change that terminology from site measure to site verification. We don't want to be out all by ourselves pulling a tape on a foundation without someone who is there to help us determine what happens beyond that dimension that's apparent at that point.
Right.
So we want someone, if that's the general contractor, that's fine. Oftentimes it is not. It may be a framer. If that's the case, we want contact information so that we can make a definite connection with that person and have them present to confirm and help us with the findings we need.
You bet.
After that is done, it is ready then for William to make sawdust in the morning or afternoon and then put it back together.
Yeah.
So,
So before we jump into talking about making sawdust and going on from that point, as much as we'd like to have plans that are complete, have the information that's necessary, it's pretty typical that we get plans that don't have all the information. So can you share, I know you talked about the site address.
Right.
That's one that's oftentimes missing. And in the builder's defense, sometimes they don't have an address before they get a permit.
right.
But usually they probably at least know where the project is going, could
Right.
give us a lot number, a parcel, something like that. But what other sort of things, what would you say are some of the most common irregularities on plans, the things that we have to dig to find out? It slows the process down a little bit.
Right.
What are those things that are most commonly missing? And then How do we go about getting enough information to do that bid if it doesn't have enough on the plans already?
Well, I have emphasized to our salespeople and our designers is that while we sell an engineered precision product, that's not what our customers buy. Our customers buy a shape that goes on top of the walls that fit the expectation of their customer. However, with that said, we need those details. And one of the ones that's often overlooked is an exact dimension on the overhang of what happens past the wall. And in this day and age, with so many trusses, where it's not just a piece of the top cord or rafter portion of the truss going past the wall, it's part of the truss. And how deep does that particular member have to be? How far past does it go? What kind of fascia material are you using? What kind of soffit treatment is there? That's all pertinent to the shape that we provide. Beyond that, then, we want to ask, is there mechanical loads in this particular roof? We see that, again, with the energy code being what it is. More and more people are putting furnaces, and a bad idea, water heaters. I hope not in the roof, but they are putting mechanical units, furnaces, air handlers, whatnot, in the roof. So we would like to provide space and a structure that is capable of carrying the load that's introduced. Generally, that's not a high-cost item. It is just a high-cost item if we have to solve it after the fact.
Right.
And you and I mentioned, and some municipalities are requiring, that we accommodate future solar load. And that's not heavy. Typically, we have a 7 pound per square foot top cord dead load. That may increase by 3 to 5 pounds, depending on what the engineer specifies. We need to know that up front. And sometimes they're not covering the whole roof, but let's not skimp on 3 pounds on part of the roof and worry about it later when they decide to put it on a larger area.
Right. Yeah, and as you mentioned, as I understand it, most of the times those small loads, the furnace in the attic often is, it's often accounted for in the weight that the trusses are designed with, but it can be a problem with the inspection process if it's not clearly called out on the layout. And then with the solar load, it doesn't make much of a difference in the cost of a typical truss package, but it could result in actually having to do repairs on the trusses after the fact if we didn't account for it, wouldn't it?
Right.
Yeah, so good information to know. And so the customer is usually going to be working with a salesperson. The designer is kind of in the background doing the design. And so what's the best way for the client to get the information to the people that need to know it, which eventually would be the designer?
Oh, we really don't want to forbid access to our design team from the customer. However, in order for efficiency, we would like as much upfront information so there isn't a lot of interruptions in that process. There is sometimes, all they have to change is this one little detail. That one little detail might affect 50 different designs, so the designer has to visit that particular component in the roof, and it takes 4 or 5 minutes, and 4 or 5 minutes times 50 pieces is, and then it increases the likelihood that one of those would be missed.
Right.
Which is a frustration for all concerned. I'd like to back up and talk a little bit about that mechanical access in the in the truss.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of the capacity of the truss to carry it, but there has to be access to the mechanical unit for maintenance. Things like changing the filter in a furnace. Quite frankly, I'm glad I don't have to climb into my attic to change a filter, but that is going to be a thing in the future. And if we have room for the furnace, but sliding the filter out hits one of our members, that could be a problem too. So that enough access. And again, that is not an expensive item. If we know ahead of time, that's where it's going.
Yeah. So much doesn't cost much ahead of time.
Right.
Which means that it might cost a bit later.
Right.
Yeah.
And delays. That's the delays and interruptions for all concerned.
Right.
So.
Okay. I appreciate all that insight.
This meal was brought to you by Truss Components of Washington. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next hot dish. And feel free to invite a friend for lunch next time.